I've been wanting to make a game that uses playing cards for a while, so this is maybe the third attempt. The other two didn't really work quite as well. And I think originally this was going to be a dice-based game. I think originally it might have even been like a Powered by the Apocalypse game. But then I kind of had to think about it. I was like, okay, what is the feeling of this genre? It's very shocking. It's very all or nothing. It's very like a character can get along just fine and suddenly a killer stops out of the shadows and kills them. And that felt to me like, okay, what does it feel like in terms of other games? And I was like, well, in a trick-taking game, you've got this back and forth, this building, this question and answer process, and then at the end of it, someone just takes everything, and someone's left with nothing.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, the podcast where I delve into the minds of tabletop gaming creatives. Join me as I uncover their creative process and inspirations. You are in the right place if you enjoy listening to thoughtful interviews with creative people.
Hey, this is Ross Bryant, and when I'm not playing characters who are being driven mad by chthonic deities that dwell in the dark abyssal gulfs between the stars, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. My guest today is Laurence Phillips of Hardy Roach Games. Laurence is a writer and designer with experience in tabletop and video games. His games focus on a broad range of topics from film, disability history, and, to quote, any of the too many things that he decides to take an interest in. Laurence, welcome to the third floor.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, Laurence, I'm going to ask you the same stupid question that every podcast has asked you at the very beginning of the interview, but I tend to phrase it a little bit differently. At some point, you knew nothing about role-playing games. You didn't know you could grab a sheet of paper, pretend to be somebody else, and roll a bunch of dice, but it was put in front of you for the very first time. Can you take me back there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, truthfully, I've no idea at what point I didn't know about tabletop role-playing games, so I do know the point at which I got invited into one, or as far as I know, I got invited in, either that or I kind of invited myself in. So when I was a kid, I was in special school, which is in what we in the UK call, like, you know, education for like disabled kids and stuff, until I was like 12, 13. And then I went to mainstream school and I made friends with a load of people who were into Games Workshop stuff. And they used to sometimes hang out in the bottom of the stairwell in the IT department, under the stairs, like proper goblins. And I remember once going there to hang out with them. You could see that they were there because there was a window. Like, weirdly, like there was through the school, you would walk through the school, there'd be a window on your right, and the window showed you under the stairwell just because some weird layout thing that happened at some point. So I always knew when they were there because I walked by and there they'd be, you know, the zoo animals, the nerd zoo animals. I don't know why we hung out there because it just meant that people would, like, you know, tap on the glass and be assholes. But like that's where we were. Anyway, so they were there and they were all passing around the relatively newly released AD&D, sorry, not AD&D, D&D 3.5 edition. And they were talking about their game, and that was kind of my first kind of experience thinking about actually playing it, but it wasn't the game that I first played. The game that I first played was the game that they currently had running, which was the Star Wars Saga edition, which was part...
Oh, wow.
There was a tabletop role-playing game club at school, which was this friend group and a teacher who was an IT teacher. IT would be information technology. That's computer class in the UK. But yeah, so he was a massive nerd. My guiding memory of him is him at this Star Wars game. It was held in one of the computer rooms. He had his feet up on the desk, and he was flicking through the latest issue of the Star Wars official magazine, and they had the top 100 best Star Wars characters, and he was tutting at the placement, and he was like, Wedge Antilles, there's only 78. So yeah, so I joined that group. My character was the most first role-playing character of first role-playing characters. He was a Rhodian sniper. He was super competent and taciturn, and he never spoke, and he called everyone meatbag. And what this means, it's a classic first RPG character. It means that you're giving yourself a character that you can't role-play with. Because no one cares about your backstory. No one's going to ask you about your backstory. So you better play a character that really, really likes talking about it, which I did. Yeah, and then my next big game was the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Second Edition, which is the first game that I ran. Yeah. I don't really remember much about that game, although I do have the character sheets kicking around in a pile. I found them the other day, like in a copy of the rulebook that I've had since then. Yeah, and then it just kind of went from there. And I didn't really start to properly branch out outside the kind of bigger games, like Call of Cthulhu and Fantasy Roleplay and la la la, until university when I got involved with the Role-Playing Game Society and I ended up running the tabletop. Well, I ended up going to the tabletop portion, which was the smallest portion of the Role-Playing Game Society. The biggest portion was like LARPing and Parlor LARP.
Right.
And I was one of the regulars there. I made good friends with Minerva McJander, who now works for Rowan Rook and Deckard, and ended up taking over for her when she left the uni for running the society. So
obviously, those early experiences had an impact. When you think back to The Boy Under the Staircase,
not that one though. The one with the glasses and the scar on his forehead. Not that one. I wasn't that one. I support trans people.
Okay. Right, that's true. Yes. And then the owl showed up.
And then after I put down my shotgun, I went back to school and played D&D.
Do you have a sense of why you connected with it back then?
I mean, it's I'd love to kind of give a fruity answer. I think probably the most honest answer is I don't really know. But the truth is probably my mates were doing it, and I liked my mates and wanted to hang out with them. I think that was kind of the starting point of when I started to kind of identify which I don't really now. It's like at the time I would kind of identify as a nerd because like nerds were still not cool or like not mainstream as a thing to be, and I was always like a what do you call them? I always like to buck against what all the other kids were doing, and I also started to form being clever around as an identity, which is a terrible idea. Never ever do that. It's a terrible idea. If you're an idiot, everyone's an idiot. The sooner you learn that, the better. And yeah, it was just something my mates were doing, so I did it. Really, like I enjoyed playing Warhammer with them, so I thought I'd enjoy playing role-playing games with them. I think like I kind of hooked onto them because they were just a really good kind of playpen for creativity, really. Like something I've always struggled with when I was younger with being creative was I was always like I've been playing video games since I was like 6 or 7, and it always felt like I needed like a framework to ever do anything like worthwhile. And the good thing about TTRPGs is they give you these barriers that hold you in, and they're like, within this ecosystem, be creative. So, and to begin with, that was, well, I don't want to use any of the official settings for stuff. I'll come up with my own crap. And then later, as I don't like these rules, I'm going to house rule these. And then later, it was, I don't like any of these rules. I'm just going to write my own game, and just kind of evolves from there. Yeah, and then like, but fundamentally, like it all comes back to just to social things. Like you should have,
the community, absolutely. Right? So it sounds like a combination of community as well as giving you an outlet, a creative outlet to kind of express yourself. That could have happened at a lot of places though, right? So is it just, I mean, if they were a bunch of chess players, do you think that you would have fallen into something different? Does it just turned out to be role-playing games? You know what I'm asking?
So I got a funny story about chess and me as a kid, which is kind of illustrative to this question, which
Okay.
is that like for a couple, like I must have been like, I don't know, under 10 at this point, but for a year or so, I was like, yeah, I'm good at chess, and I would play my dad at chess, who knew nothing about chess, and I'd like win because I had like a slightly better ability to pick things up quickly and games and stuff. And then I was on this kind of every year, my extended family, we, they pool their money and kind of rent a big house somewhere, and like all of the cousins and aunts and uncles would like live in this house for like a week or two. And I thought, okay, I'll play my cousin, who being like a shithead 7-year-old, I was like, and my cousin, by the way, was in his late 20s at this point. Like most of my cousins, all of my cousins are like
Okay.
either way older than me or way younger than me. And as they have kids, and I was like, yeah, I can beat him. He, I didn't really think much of him as like an intellect, and like he probably not. But also, what I didn't know as a kid is that you don't have to be smart to be good at chess. Like you just need to know how to play chess.
Right.
And he did know how to play chess. I don't know how good he was, but he knew how to play chess more than like a 9-year-old. And he beat me in like 3 moves, right? Like, and then like I tried again, and he beat me in like 10 moves. And I got so upset about this, I never touched a chess set again, because I was just that shithead who was like, if I'm not instantly good at it, I don't want to do it anymore. And the thing is, I wouldn't say I was instantly good at being creative at TTRPGs, but I had the skills already because I'd been reading fiction since I was like 4 or whatever. I had like I always had a reading age much higher than the average, and I've been thinking about video games for years as well. So I don't know, it just came naturally to me, like a lot of things did, like a lot of humanities things did. So and people would praise me for it. Which is a big thing. Well, yeah, when you're like nice. An overly self-absorbed, like autistic child, you do things because adults are like, wow, that's so impressive, you're so smart.
I feel very single.
And you grow up and people stop doing that, and you have like a personality crisis. That's typically the root.
You're sure?
It's what people call the gifted child.
You said
thing,
something interesting.
I hate the idea, like even the name for it. Because I wasn't gifted. I just had a really good social environment from a young age.
Yeah, I was put through that whole gifted program back at that time, and don't remember it fondly. And like they've started pressing my daughter for that. And I'm like, if she wants to, that's fine, but it's not something that I would press for. That separation, when I was younger, I didn't realize what was happening, and I think I have a much clearer sense. But you said something interesting, which is I realized that I wasn't good at chess. Do you have a sense of when you realized you were good at role-playing games?
It's a good question. I think it's when it certainly wasn't with my Rhodian sniper, that's for sure. But I mean, it's hard to say. I think probably when I started GMing and found that I really enjoyed hiding the seams, of kind of planning stuff out, and found that it wasn't that difficult.
Sure,
it's I don't know. It's an interesting thing, really. I think fundamentally, like, for as much as we kind of dress it up in kind of technicalities, and those technicalities can be important, fundamentally, like role-playing is structured storytelling. So I think the second that probably just the second I engaged with it, like it was storytelling rather than like it was a video game, which I think is how most of my friends really kind of engage with it, and I think is a more natural kind of D&D way to engage with games. But yeah, I suppose it was that, like, maybe to someone else I wasn't particularly good at them because I wasn't like min-maxing my character and stuff, but that's just like a perception difference.
Sure. Now, and we're going to be talking about Il Fantasma, obviously, a lot today, but before we jump into that, it's a horror game.
Yeah.
So I want to know if that is also a passion of yours. Do you consider yourself a horror fan, and when did that start to develop?
That's a really good question. I think for me, I was like a coward when I was younger. Um, I have kind of two formative memories of horror just as a general thing, and I'm not sure when exactly they land in terms of in the timeline of my life, but one of them is the first time I bought a video game that was a higher age rating than I was supposed to have, right? And that game was Resident Evil 4 because I was a big Nintendo head and I
Oh boy.
bought Nintendo official magazine every however often it came out in the UK, like fortnightly probably. Sorry, my chair is going to creak. Um, and 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 I remember just like seeing pictures of it and being like, "Oh, this game looks so cool." And I bought it. I didn't have like a debit card or anything at the time, so to buy it, I kind of occasionally what I do. I didn't have a bank account, so occasionally what I do if I needed something off Amazon is I'd like put stuff in a cart and I call my dad over and be like, "Hey, could you pay for this?" and then give him the money right for it. And I did that, but I just made sure that it was all ready for him to pay, and he didn't see what it was. He wouldn't have known what it was, or And then when it arrived, I squirreled it up to my room and always played it with like an eye on the door, so they didn't walk in when someone's head was being chainsawed off. And I honestly don't think they would have cared that much. They probably would have been concerned, but
Right.
mostly it was, I think, because I was always very finicky about that kind of thing. I remember being at like a sleepover and getting really upset because the kids settled in to watch Dog Soldiers, and I
Oh
was
wow.
like,
Nice.
no, we shouldn't be watching this. We're 12, and like made everyone stop, and like everyone hated me, I'm sure. But yeah, and then the other one was recording The Shining off of TV. I'm watching it when I was ill on Home Alone, and I remember the bit with the hotel scene, the woman in the bathtub scene, and it scared me, so I
Yep.
sprang up out off the sofa and like ran to the other side of the room because I was so terrified. And I guess I started to become kind of fascinated by that experience of being really scared by stuff. I started to get into kind of online media that talked about horror films a lot, and then I started kind of collecting obscure horror movies and killing any horror effect that they had for me. Like I very very rarely feel anything watching
Right.
horror films. I mean, I like them, but like I don't get like actively scared or um and the same for like video games. But I mean, I think horror films are interesting because they're kind of an example of the kind of genre trickery we do where we're we're kind of more comfortable talking about certain ideas and themes if they're put in like the right contextual framework. And ultimately, genre is
Yep.
kind of a construct. And like the thing about giallo films is that often people kind of dub them like Italian horror films, but that kind of reductive because some of them are horror films and some of them are like Hitchcockian thrillers and some of them are like crime movies and some of them are some
Yep.
combination of the multiple. The only area that I get particularly like semiotic with this is like I think if the film has actively undeniably supernatural elements, it's not a giallo film. So often people would cite Suspiria as a giallo film and I don't because it's explicitly supernatural. um
Oh, that's interesting, that distinction you're making, because often, like when you hear Giallo talked about, Suspiria is usually one of the first
yes,
ones that's brought up. But your contention is if it involves supernatural,
so
it
I mean
disqualifies it from
ultimately
that
people can
category?
disagree with it because it doesn't matter, there's no thing, but the
Well, yeah, of
reasoning I
course.
come to is because giallo is largely like the title giallo as a term that we understand it outside of Italy and in Italy are different. In outside of Italy, we
Interesting.
call giallo is this particular oeuvre of 60s and 70s thrillers and horrors and crime films. In Italy, giallo is just the word for mystery stories, so they would call Sherlock Holmes
I did
and
not know
Hercule
that.
Poirot and Agatha Christie and Miss Marple, they would all be giallo, right?
Yeah.
um like yeah. So but the name comes from the a particular company called I'm gonna forget exactly, it's like Monte Montadori, something like that. I need to see it again to get it right. But a particular company, there wasn't a strong tradition of mystery stories in Italy prior to the 1930s, and in the 1930s, a particular publishing company translated and localized a load of mostly British but some American mystery stories, and they released them with these yellow covers with like a circle in the middle, and they were known as that's like pulp novels, right? And they were known as giallo novels because giallo just means yellow, so they had yellow covers. There you go. So so like the roots of the term itself are in crime mystery stories specifically. So I personally think that it doesn't necessarily make sense to include supernatural stories in the wider genre as much as it does, things like the kind of films that would go on to inspire slasher films, like, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and Blood and Black Lace and stuff like that, which do have supernatural elements, but generally those aren't in the kind of proto-Charlie films, right?
That's really interesting. Yeah, you know considerably more about this than I do. I mean, I'm a horror fan, and I have always it's been for me, it has, obviously Italian, and it's one of those things where it's like I see it and I'm like, that's giallo. That's what giallo looks like to me, right? It has a certain aesthetic to it. I didn't realize the deep history around it.
Because it's interesting, right? Really because there were mystery films prior to what we would now call giallo, what non-Italians would call giallo, but we don't put them in the giallo film tradition because that film tradition is quite specific, right? I've talked to Italians about this and been like, what do you call like this period of like, Mario Bava, Dario Argento, these directors? And they just say, we don't. Like, they're giallo films in the same way that like a film made in like the 40s or 30s or 80s or 90s that's a mystery film we call a giallo film, but we don't have a particular name for these. It's just like the films of Mario Bava, the films of Dario Argento. So but having said that, like, I do think the fact that Italians themselves don't use the term doesn't preclude its usefulness as like a film term, because generally what it come to regard to is not just a kind of a genre, but also like a kind of a set of themes, a set of approaches to certain topics, and it's in a filmic tradition. Like, you can't really talk about giallo without talking about like neorealism, and then without talking about like the white phone era of fascist filmmaking in the 30s and 40s. So it's it's all part of a continuum. And I think that if you don't, sorry, I'm gonna go on a ramble here about. Okay,
this is fantastic.
So
keep going.
I think it's interesting to note that, like, slasher films like Halloween and Friday the 13th and stuff, they're very much an Americanized version of like this genre, and I mean, this comes out in very obvious ways in stuff like I want you to, if you're listening to this, go and pause it and do this, and you can do this later. Is like, go and listen to the theme music of the film Deep Red, which is arguably the kind of pinnacle of the genre. And then go and listen to the Halloween theme, because the at least opening parts of those are exactly the same. And Deep Red was made like 2 years before Halloween. I'm not saying...
Look at you, John Carpenter.
Well, but it just goes to show, like, there's no such thing as an original idea, right? But like, but the point is that the slasher films took things in a different direction, because of the kind of uniqueness of American history compared to the last 30 years of Italian history. American audiences seemed fundamentally uncomfortable with some of the kind of postmodernist nihilism that was present in giallo as a genre. So slasher films are decidedly more moralistic in tone, right? There's an evil. Like, you took at Halloween as like the example, and you've got Dr. Loomis saying basically describing like a mentally ill person as like a pure kind of foundational evil. Like, he looked in his eyes and there was nothing there but like pure evil. And like, that's fine. I love Halloween as a film, but I personally don't find that super compelling. But it's just interesting how that started with a mental patient. And then it got to like increasingly supernatural. So now we have a man lives in dreams, and now we have a zombie, right? And you know, it's interesting to note the elements that American slashers did take, and the elements that they just didn't think people would relate to. And I think and this is something that compels me to make a game about it. Something that compels me about Giallo as a genre is that it is not positive, it is not optimistic, but it is humanist in a way that slasher films aren't. Because it's really concerned with why people do things and the systems that make them do things, as opposed to slasher films, which aren't really interested in why the killers are doing things. They're just murderous, crazy, insane, whatever. Right. And like maybe you get something like, oh well, Freddy Krueger wants to get revenge on the people who killed him, but he was already evil. He was already a murdering child molester. So like now, Giallo films don't always do this well, in that a very common motif in Giallo films is like someone's crazy. But it's interesting to note that rather than their craziness being like this thing that is just part of them and makes them like this irredeemable thing, is usually created by an event. Like usually it's like they see something super traumatic, maybe even a family member kills another family member when they were a child, and this kind of fundamentally kind of alters their brain like long term, right? And that's not exactly like progressive, right? Because obviously like people with mental health issues are more likely to be the victim of violence than they are the perpetrator. But we should also think about that on a metaphorical level. Like what's it saying on like a general thematic level? Because what it's fundamentally saying is people aren't born bad, the world is bad and it makes people bad. And like that's like where the tradition with neorealism comes in, because neorealism is chiefly concerned with portraying the world, and in the 1940s and 1950s in Italy, the world was pretty ugly. Pretty much. It's rough times. And like I think it's something for why like European cinema in general, especially continental European cinema, is so much more willing in this period of filmmaking to break these taboos, to show sex and violence and drugs, because who cares? Like, you're either you or your parents underwent like this horrific, world-shattering, nihilistic event. Like it doesn't, and we all know about this, right? Like we all know we're shagging and doing drugs and beating the shit out of each other. We all know this. We don't gain anything by pretending we're not, that it doesn't exist. Whereas America kind of largely escaped any kind of material consequence, and so it's just kind of like, well, we fixed it. We fixed the world. Hooray, it's great. To simplify, obviously.
And it all happened over there, right? So
which is why there was a strong American appetite, I think, for imported foreign films like this. But they didn't make them. They didn't.
Isn't that interesting? That's cool.
But I'll stop before I get carried away to a different topic entirely and get even further away from the question.
that was you. So I consider myself a bit of a horror file. I just learned so much during that conversation. So well played. I very much enjoyed it. Guys, the Insider Insights series allows me to sit with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creation. We are going to talk about a lot of the themes that we started with on the other side. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Sam Dunewald, and I'm here to tell you about Dice Exploder, my tabletop RPG design podcast where each week I take a single game mechanic and break it down with a friend. Come listen to me talk to Alex Roberts about love and pity, John Harper about elegance and layout, and Mikey Ham about, what else? Exploding dice! It's Dice Exploder, breaking down RPG design one mechanic at a time. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
So as we kind of hinted before the break, Il Fantasma, when this is released, we're going to time it right with the Kickstarter itself. So you should be able to click on the links. You know the routine. Go down, scroll down, go to the notes, click on the links, and let's go back this. I'm going to read a little bit of a blurb that I found for it, and then we're going to really talk about where the hell this thing came from, though I think we got some hints about it before the break. Il Fantasma is a magical realist neo-noir horror thriller TTRPG in which you and your compatriots are a cast of down-on-their-luck and disgraced actors who, due to circumstances none of you can recall, have committed to starring in a seemingly endless sequence of violent European murder mysteries for a mysterious new film studio. So I want to start with the fact, Laurence, that I have never seen those words put together in that order to describe a game, which I think is fantastic because I've talked to a lot of people that make games. This feels very original to me. So what I would love to do, if we can, is go back to the day before the acorn dropped from the tree. Can you give me an idea of like where the original itch that ended up becoming this game really kind of rose up?
Man, that's really hard to pin down because it's an idea that has been kind of milling about in my brain for, I don't know, like 8-9 years maybe. Like,
and what's that idea though,
well,
Laurence, right? Because I see what it becomes, right? But what's
the
that
foundational
core?
idea, which is shifted away from massively, is a Giallo TTRPG. Sure. Because it's a genre that I think is cool and interesting. And how would I go about mechanicizing storytelling with it, right? And it shifted somewhat to now because I do try when I describe it. Oh, hang on. Can you still hear me? All right.
Okay, yeah, cool. You're good.
Your video got a bit choppy, but as long as it's all right, you're fine. It shifted from that quite a lot because when I describe it now, I don't necessarily call it a Giallo game. I call it a magical realist neo-noir game. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple of reasons for that. And one of them is practical and one of them is creative. The creative reason is that, I'll go to the creative reason afterwards because there are kind of a couple of different reasons depending on which word we're talking about. The practical reason is that a lot of reactions I had when I was first talking to people about this, when it was in a kind of early playtesting stage, was I would say, oh, I'm working on this game and da-da-da-da-da. And they'd say, oh, well, I don't really know the genre, so not really interested. And that was the case for a while. And I realized that that not everyone shares my peculiarity of when someone says, I made a TTRPG of this really specific thing that you don't know about, my response is, wow, I'd really like to learn about that, and I love how games have the potential to teach things. Let me read it. Not everyone has that approach, and especially not in a kind of, modern day environment where like genre is, as much as it always was, but genre is more than ever a marketing tool than it is a kind of critical tool. So people kind of hear like, oh, Giallo, don't know that. It's not the stuff that I like. So, and what I'm trying to do is make it, broaden the basis so people don't instantly write it off. And the other thing is also broaden the basis of kind of themes that I'm playing with. And there's a game design consideration in that it became magical realist because I realized that I was grappling with a problem that game designers before me have very much grappled with horror games, which is how do you make players do self-defeating or self-destructive or stupid stuff, which I think a lot of horror games don't necessarily have an answer for mechanically other than just really impress your players, like have players who have the genre knowledge to want to behave that way. But I didn't really want to rely on that, particularly because it's a genre that people don't know. So I added this second layer to the game where you're not just playing characters in a Giallo story, you're playing actors playing characters in a Giallo story. So, and these characters are disposable. So this solves a few aims. Firstly, it makes characters makes
Yeah.
characters disposable. You can die and then just kind of continue with your character, and that death can inform your character's growth, but it doesn't cut off the fun. You can do worse stuff as your like role. Like your actor and your role are both going to be like not great people, but your actor at least you can be bad on like a kind of, at least there's like some sympathy here. Whereas in the film you can do some truly horrible things and it's like, well, part of the film in it. And like that still creates drama between characters because they're experiencing these things. They've been drawn into this reality. So, you know, even if it is just part of the film, one actor might be a bit miffed that they just got like stabbed 100 times in the stomach or something, you know. And then the other thing it does is it allows me to abstract genre tropes and storytelling structures in a way that is more natural and can be approached by someone who doesn't even know those stories. Like this game has a few inspirations mechanically. One of them is Lovecraft-esque by Black Sail. Sorry, Black Armada. There we go. Of Josh and Becky, who I like very much. We're friendly, I think. And I really liked how that game how it really kind of structured it's a game not about being in a Lovecraft world. It's a game about making a Lovecraft story, and that's a distinction that I think is important. And I loved that approach. And the other game that inspired it, just from a kind of moment-to-moment mechanics level, is Dogs in the Vineyard, which I really like as a storytelling device. And I also really like the way that it abstracted the feeling and mechanics of poker hands into dice. And I thought what would be fun would be to abstract it back into cards with some other kind of gambling mechanic. So my game is using sort of bridge as a foundational, like, or trick-taking games in general as a foundational thing.
Yeah. And was that always present, or when did that start to emerge? The idea of
I've been wanting to make a game that uses playing cards for a while, so this is maybe the third attempt. The other two didn't really work quite as well. And I think originally this was going to be a dice-based game. I think originally it might have even been like a Powered by the Apocalypse game. But then I kind of had to think about it. I was like, okay, what is the feeling of this genre? It's very shocking. It's very all or nothing. It's very like a character can get along just fine and suddenly a killer stops out of the shadows and kills them. And that felt to me like, okay, what does this feel like what does it feel like in terms of other games? And I was like, well, in a trick-taking game, you've got this back and forth, this building, this question and answer process. And then at the end of it, someone just takes everything and someone's left with nothing. And that seemed very significant to me and a good starting point. So, I mean, ultimately, a lot of these ideas, they start with, I kind of want to do something like this. And then you sort of think, and then you kind of just think about a way to do it that feels correct. And sometimes you can't. And then you just abandon it and just move on to something else.
Like, give me a context, because I understand what you're saying, but I haven't wrapped my head around it quite yet. So can you give me an idea of like a typical point in the game where the cards come out and they become part of the resolution?
So
can you walk me through that?
So play is divided into scenes, and the first time the cards will probably come out is in scene drafting, where there's a table of scenes that are basically fiction prompts. Like, they're not this happens. It's like a character discovers a secret, or a character indulges in a forbidden pleasure, or like a character is tries to hide something like that. It's just these kind of very broadly interpretable fiction prompts. So the director, the GM, would draw the three cards, and there's some intricacies to this, but basically they pick a scene and then they kind of come up with a foundational premise for the scene. And at any point in this game, other players can throw in suggestions of what to do. This is actually kind of semi-mechanicized, not in a. I don't really like kind of very flowchart mechanic, so I always try and keep things a little bit loosey-goosey. But anyway, so you play the scene, you kind of decide how many characters are in it and who makes sense to be in it. And in all of this stuff, the director is kind of not like a firm arbitrator, more of like a chair, like a mediator, right? So they kind of have the final word to stop conversations going on too long. So, if there's like a long drawn out conversation over whether this should be the opera or at the theater, the GM can just cut in and say, hey, it's the opera, let's go, right? And then so you'll play through the scene just in a kind of an improv kind of way that you would play most games. And then at the point where two characters have opposing objectives with a stake, with some kind of stake, then it becomes a conflict. And at that point, you determine the players who have a stake in the conflict. They draw cards based on their stats. And what stats you can use are very broadly interpretable. It's not like fights are muscle. Like, so the stats are muscle, heart, brains, tongue, and spine. And
nice.
It's very broadly interpretable. So it would make sense to use muscle in a fight, but you could use heart in a fight. So you might use muscle in a fight if you're trying to physically overpower them. You might use heart in a fight if you're trying to throw them off with like a rabid display of angry fury. You might use brains if you're trying to target particular areas to kind of incapacitate them. Like, you can broadly interpret it. Fundamentally, it's up to the director to say, no, that doesn't make sense. No, I think it's this, right? So you draw cards, and then whoever instigated the conflict plays a bid, and they play it. So they play a card from their hand. The suit kind of sets a bit of a tone, not like a super strong one, but just to give you, again, I'm a big believer in just giving you these little guidelines so that you're not working with a blank page. So it's like, if you're using a club, you're doing something a bit direct, right? This isn't going to be a fancy thing. If you're using a spade, it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be a bit elaborate and maybe a little overcomplicated. And so they play their bid, they say what they do, and then the other party counter bids, and the lower bid wins. And if the counter bid is higher value, then they have to describe how they lose the upper hand in this. And if it's a lower value, they have to say how they gain the upper hand. And then the loser in this bidding round can then carry on with the same cards. They can escalate it, make it more dangerous or more narratively significant, but get more cards. Or they can relent and just yield the stakes. And then once the conflict's over, whoever is left... Oh, and people can take a bit of, I guess, damage, you call it, but it's kind of damage, and it's both good and bad, trauma. But if you lose a round of bidding, you take a little bit of damage, and then once you've relented, you take the whole pot, because the pot will just keep building as long as the conflict goes on. So then that kind of pot will add up to your kind of status in the film, like how at threat you are. So if you're if your pot's fairly small, if your pile is fairly small, you can't actually die. You can just have worse and worse things happen to you. If you pass a certain threshold, you can now theoretically die. And if you pass an even higher threshold, every single conflict you get in is life or death. Like, somehow it will just end up that way. So you get this escalation where the longer you're in the film, the more at risk of dying you are in. And then cards come in later as well, because the GM, this is a zero prep game by design. The GM does not know who the killer is. None of the players know who the killer is. And the killer is functionally nobody until they are. Like, that's something I believe in strongly in terms of how people should approach fiction, and that I'm trying to code into the game, which is that nothing exists in this reality until it exists. Like, you ask, like, in Star Wars, what was Yoda doing in this 10-year span where we don't have any fiction? He was doing nothing, because he doesn't exist. Like, there's nothing there. Like, this quest to find the gaps, it's comforting, it can be fun, but like, it doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't gain you anything from like a critical perspective or like a storytelling perspective. I'm not saying it's not worth doing. It's just it's good to remember what it is, right? So anyway, the point is, the killer is nobody. The killer is a force, And then at the third act of the film, you tot up like how many people did this person, how many people did the character, the player hurt, how many people who they love were hurt. Were their wants destroyed, were their needs destroyed, like what did they do in the film? And you tot it up, and basically whoever comes out the most wrecked is just the killer. And then if something doesn't make sense, you just do it in post, right? Because a big thing in these films is that they don't necessarily make sense. Like you can watch Blood and Black Lace, and you can be like, how the hell did spoilers for a 60-year-old film, but in Blood and Black Lace the killer ends up being two people, a man and a woman, and that doesn't make any sense because it's obviously not a woman in multiple scenes. There's a bit where the mask gets pulled off, and for a single frame or two, you can see the face, and it's neither of them. But because it doesn't matter, like it's not important. Like,
right.
At that point, the killer was neither of them, right? And now it is one. Now it is. The waveform has collapsed. We have observed the truth, right? So anyone could be the killer, and actually being the killer, when you come out of the film again, your trauma is a resource. The truths you have uncovered is a resource. The fact that you were the killer is a resource, but the more you start to use this power, the more the real world is going to start to become like the fictional world where things aren't true anymore.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's that I'm going for that kind of, if you've ever seen Mulholland Drive or Inland Empire, this feeling that reality is slowly collapsing and becoming less and less reliable. We're becoming a film by virtue of living up to it.
With the breakup of play, in these films and the ability to, I really love this idea of I get to play all kinds of different things, right? All within the same game, by that conceit of these actors being trapped. Like, how long is a film? One session, 2 sessions? Do I get multiple films a session? I'd like to get a sense of play there.
Typically, I would expect it to be 2 to 3 sessions. You can do it in a session. I mean, it depends how long your sessions are, right? Like, I have done a complete film in a 2-hour playtest or at conventions. The problem is the film does tend to a little bit tight. You kind of have to rush to the end of it and sometimes fill in some scenes, right? But I'd say for a full satisfying film, I'd say maybe 2 3-hour, 3-4 hour sessions, maybe 3 if you want to get more detailed with it. But the problem is really, and this is a problem just of being, I've worked in TTRPGs for a long time, but I haven't been working with my own outlet, right, for very long, or at least not successfully. I've written a whole batch of 1-pagers under my own name. Otherwise, it's mostly been working on other people's stuff. I've worked on Legacy, Life Among the Ruins, and Spire, and Hardwired Island, and some various video games. And it's a different experience because if you want to playtest something, you can just go to their Discord, the Rowan Reckondecker Discord that has however many hundreds of people, of thousands in it, and you'll have people lining up. That's not been the case. It's been friends and whoever I can run one-shots for, because it's not that hard to run one-shots for people. It's harder to run campaigns for people, particularly regular ones. So the area where the game needs the most playtesting is in that. So that's going to be part of the development process even after the Kickstarter, right? It's these things need testing. So I wish I could give you a more confident answer, but based on sessions I've run so far.
You did,
I guess.
As you've been playtesting, right? So we've learned, like many games, this one is no different, where it starts in one place. Some things don't change, right? Some cores are present the whole time, but a lot of other things do change, right? The idea and the structure, went through a lot of, it sounds like, a lot of different versions. Do you have a sense of when it clicked? Do you remember, as you've been going through this process, where suddenly you started to see what this game really was, and it became the lighthouse?
This game's a bit unusual in terms of other games I've designed, in that playtesting from the first playtest has gone bizarrely well. insanely well, and like
Oh, really?
very little of the foundational mechanics of this game have changed from the start of playtesting to now. Like the most recent,
Wow.
the biggest changes have been the most recent ones actually, where I realized I needed more of a structure for the creation of fiction outside of conflicts. So I came up with some new mechanics for that and playtested them, and they work well so far. But no, this one was really unusual in that the first game I ran, people were like, "Yeah, this is really good. This really works. Like, I get what you're doing." And like it was kind of a bit confusing for like the first couple of scenes, but after that it just gelled.
Right.
Like I've had friends run this game. I had my wife run it for a group of colleagues and friends of colleagues who had a variety of experience. One of like in the main group she ran it for, one person had been playing D&D for a few years. One person had had like 3 sessions of D&D. One person had never touched a game ever of any kind. So it was all of them had only ever played D&D just for varying amounts of time, and they all got it right. Like after a couple of scenes, they got it, and none of them, including my wife, had ever seen a Giallo film. And I said, "Okay, tell me what plot you told."
Interesting.
And she like told me the plot, and I wrote it down. And I was like, "That's a Giallo film. You just made a Giallo film." And like, I'm genuinely not saying this as boasting, because I am so critical of my own work. But I don't. It's one of the most joyous things I've ever worked on, because I've never had that happen before. I've never had things click this well before. So I'd say it is insane. Like, to answer the question, like, when was the click?
Yeah.
The click was like when I was working on like the first playtest draft, when I was like, I think this really works. And you know, you get that feeling during writing, right? And often you think that, and then it's just not true. But this is one of those times when I thought that, and I turned out to be right, pretty much. Like, I've run a lot of playtests at this point, and only once or twice have I had a player say that they didn't enjoy it. And maybe I just got really lucky with that.
Did they explain themselves?
Yes, but not in a way that I necessarily found super easy to understand. I think the main complaint, and this is something that I think is still something of a complaint, but I think it's one of those things that is a varying complaint depending on what kind of games you tend to play a lot of. And one of their big complaints is because of the way scenes are broken up, they felt like they had to wait a while to do something. And that they went through, there would be like a couple of scenes where their character wasn't there, and so this was a problem I was aware of. And the text of the rules are kind of like, if just because your character's not there doesn't mean you're not at the table, right? If you've got ideas or suggestions, or you want to throw in a bit of like, you know, stuff, please do that. The problem I found is that unless you're a particular kind of player, players don't like doing that unless there's a game mechanic telling them to do that, right? And that's understandable, because people don't want to step on people's toes and stuff. So that was part of what I built that into the newer mechanics I recently implemented for kind of adding more structure to fiction creation, which also let me put in a structure for fiction creation if you're not in the scene, while still including the suggestion thing. And what I found in the times that I've only been able to playtest this mechanic a couple of times, but what I found in the playtest for this mechanic is having a like once per scene you can come in and assert something opens people up to make suggestions. So like, even though they have only a little bit more power than they had, it's breaking that ice and getting them used to this idea that they can do that.
Well, oddly gives them permission, right? Like, it's essentially what you're doing is opening that door for them. So when your wife was running it for this group and unknowingly created a Giallo a storyline, was that before these new mechanics were in place or after?
This was before. Like it worked. Like the game, I think foundationally worked fine before the new mechanics. But I was, I think part of it was that I've been working on something I've been working on increasingly over the last couple of months, is kind of a campaign system, because I ideally I want this to be a campaign game where you build these actors and you unveil, because you know very little about your own character when you start playing them, and you unveil their truth as you go through films and uncover traumas and stuff. So I was thinking about campaign progression, and the game's got this playbook system, or known as archetypes in this, because, you know, game designers, we love giving a stupid different name for something. Just call them classes, everyone knows.
It's not a GM, it's a director.
Exactly. But, you know, all of this stuff adds to, like, the verisimilitudinous aesthetics, you know, so it gets people in the mindset.
Very much so.
But, but no, I need to think about, so archetypes have tropes, which are basically like character abilities. So they're like little fictional things that fit in. So, like, the crook archetype has a trope called the gun will be there, where during a conflict, you can reach behind something like a toilet tank or a bench or whatever, and there's a gun taped there that someone left for them earlier, right? But I realized something, and at the moment realized when I had a couple of playtests where it was near the conclusion of the film, and it was a big dramatic, like, kind of confrontation film, and one of the characters was like a mafioso, and they said, oh, well, my character comes in and he's got a gun. And I didn't correct them because I was like, well, like, that works. Like, that you're playing the game, right? You're engaging with this fiction. That is very much something that would happen here. But now, what does this trope mean? What does this ability mean? If, like, you can say, well, I've got a gun before the conflict starts, what's the point of being able to get one in the conflict, right? So I needed some kind of limiter on that. So the solution I came to was, if you're in the scene, you can freely hurt yourself and help others. You can do that as much as you want. So, but when you do it, it's going to cost something, and it's not going to cost a specific thing, because almost every punishment in this game is also a reward. So it's just going to do something. It might give you more trauma. It might give you, like, a truth that's being held against you. It might give you, like, a broader consequence, like maybe even out of the film, right? But it's going to do something. So you can have a gun, but, you know, you're going to pay the piper for it. But he can have, if you say he has a gun, that's free. You can just say that. You can just say he has a gun, because part of the design aim of this game is to encourage, like, people to act against their own best interest, right? Like, I can't remember where we started on this. See, this is something. What was the question? How was it? It doesn't matter
at this point. It doesn't matter.
Like, I guess what it is, like, these are, like, problems that, like, I could probably not fix necessarily, but, like, I don't know. I'm not one for, like, hysterical tinkering, as Orson Welles would say, but, like, I also don't want to leave a minor flaw that I know is going to build up over time.
Right. So, and the reason I asked that question, which I remember now, is asking about, you know, was this before or after the new mechanics, when we were talking about your wife? I'm still stuck here a little bit, Laurence. So I'm gonna pick at this a little bit more, which is, how the hell did that happen then? Like, when you look back and realize what that table did without you present, which is also important from a playtest perspective, you weren't there, because, you know, when designers are doing their own playtests, it corrupts things, right? It changes things. You weren't there, but yet they came back with the product you were designing for. Do you understand why that happened?
I mean, I can make some, like, theories. What have you
done in the game?
I mean, I think it's two things. I think the first thing is it's making the GM, especially, because they're kind of, even if they're not dictating play in the way that they might in a more traditional quote unquote game, they're still guiding play, making sure the GM understands, like, the core themes of what's going on. And one of the bits of fluff text I have in, like, the kind of playtesting kind of draft that I give to people is, you're damaged, and in your damage you damage others. Maybe you feel bad, but you just can't stop. It's too late for that. But beyond such concepts as good and evil, it's the 20th century, baby. You don't have an evil soul. Don't worry about that superstitious stuff. You're just a piece of shit. Perhaps a sympathetic piece, but a piece of shit nonetheless. And I think I found it, like almost every playtest group I've had, I've read that to, and they've said to me that really helped because it got them in the mindset. Yeah. Because fundamentally, what you need for people to tell a Giallo story is for it to be the 70s, for people to be behaving badly, and for the basic structure of like the film and scenes to feel right. And the first things can be done with, I think, appropriate expectation managing and fluff. And the second can be done by making sure that the game can't be played any other way. Like, that just playing the mechanics as written make that structure happen, which is something I love doing in game design. It's like, for me, it's the whole thing. It's the whole kit and caboodle. It's, that is what game design is. It's making a system that can't be interacted with any other way but the way you want it to be.
Can you think of a mechanic in place that we haven't discussed yet that you think really enforces that guardrail and makes sure that this game is played the way it's designed?
Okay, one we haven't discussed yet is kind of difficult to say because I think the game is not super.
Well, let's bring up one we have discussed then. Where do you feel like you as a designer are enforcing this?
I'd say the scene drafting, the scene table ensures that the tone of the scene is in line with the kind of scenes you'd expect to find without telling people what to do and say. It's just setting a tone. It's right. There are ones, they're not all negative things. There are ones where it's like characters indulge a shared pleasure, but within the context of existing within a whole lot of kind of dark, mysterious, secretive things, that has a tone, right? Like if you have a positive scene among a load of positive scenes, people are like, okay, this game is positive and cheery. And if you put a positive scene among a load of negative scenes, people are like, okay, this is our moment of respite that we later take away from someone and show it's all horrible.
Right.
The other thing is by maintaining a sense of suspicion and PvP that isn't fun removing, right? Because like something about this game as well is like you traumatize each other both in a general sense and in terms of a mechanical sense. You give each other trauma cards, but that trauma isn't necessarily a bad thing in the concept of the game because the trauma is something that needs more testing for campaign reason. But in the film world, you draw from your player deck and take cards into your trauma deck, and in the real world you draw from your trauma deck and put cards back into your real deck.
That's cool.
And you can use that trauma as well to spend your kind of to influence the fiction, right? And everything has a use, right? Like, okay, you've uncovered a truth that suggests that I'm the killer. That truth, as long as it stays assigned to me, is a little nugget of unreality that I can even use in the real world to make something true. And you can even use it, that's character progression, is you use these truths to illustrate, to remember something, right? And it doesn't have to be the same thing, so cool. Right? So let's say there's a truth where it's like, you murdered your wife, right? Or like you murdered your wife previously, so like that's a truth that suggests you might be responsible for the new murders. That truth stays against you and you leave the film, and maybe you didn't murder your wife literally, but maybe you were responsible for a major change of life for you made sure your wife got fired or something like that, or you made sure a loved one got fired or something, or you were responsible for your wife's death without literally murdering her, like you were in a car crash, right? Like there's a lot of ways to interpret that, and that's what I want people to do. It's giving people that little nugget to extrapolate out from, and it's making sure that hurting each other is also helping each other. Like taking damage, it's not like in whatever D&D where if you turn around and stab your friend, well, now he might not get to play for the rest of the session. It's like, I'm going to turn around and stab my friend, and then they can later use that moment to kind of grow their character and uncover some cool narrative about them, So it's all about, fundamentally, lots of this game design is about that core of incentivizing people to behave badly and to behave badly towards each other. So I think those are the two things is how do you get people to behave like they're in a Giallo film, even though they've never seen one, set the frameworks for the kind of scenes that they create, and set the incentives for the kind of behavior they engage in. and then you're basically there. Fundamentally you're there.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. So guys, you know the routine. Like I mentioned before, the link to the Kickstarter is right down here. We're going to take one more break. When we get back from this break, I'm going to stop talking to Laurence about what he makes. We're going to focus on what he consumes a little bit more. I'm going to find out if he's got one thing worth sharing. We'll be right back.
Attention all floor heads, gather round. I have a quest for you. You can simultaneously show your love for the show and embark on rewarding adventures. Head over to drivethrurpg.com, your one-stop shop for all things gaming. Whether you're looking for rulebooks, maps, art, or epic tales to enhance your gaming experience, it is that one-stop shop. Now, in the show notes, there's a unique affiliate link. Every one of your purchases directly supports Tabletop Talk if you use that link. It's like casting a powerful spell that helps us keep the podcast going strong. So next time you're itching for a new adventure, follow the affiliate link in our show notes or bookmark it now in your browser. It can be your portal to everything on DriveThruRPG. Now let's get back to the show, but please support the show by using that DriveThruRPG affiliate link next time you are shopping at the site.
So Laurence, the idea of this segment is kind of like the last bookend, right? So we start off the interview kind of learning about your history, where you came from. Then we do the middle where we talk about, how that turned into a game that's available and where we see the early inspirations come in. The end of this is really to get an understanding of other types of media that you consume. So I'd like to know, is there one thing we're sharing where something that you has grabbed onto your brain the way you're hoping your game will grab onto other people's brains? What's been living rent free in your head?
It's a difficult question, really, because lately the main kind of art that I've been engaging with is kind of stuff that's just kind of easy to do, watching my wife or whatever. Like I've been slowly kind of introducing her to Star Trek, and we've made it up to Voyager, and we're watching it alongside the X-Files, which has been just kind of alternating, which has been a fun experience. But I guess this is something I've been like this. So to kind of answer the question slightly differently, I guess, to be a bit annoying, of just something I've kind of been thinking about a lot lately, even if I haven't been actively engaging with it, is while I'm working on a project, I like just idly thinking about other future projects, just because it's kind of a little bit of a mental break that still kind of keeps you a bit mentally limber. And I got a couple of projects I'm thinking about. One of them, I'm kind of not letting myself think about it too much, because it's kind of entirely foundation, like whether it would be doable at all would be entirely whether I could contact the right people in Russia to ask them, and then if they were okay with it, afford the rights to it. But when I was one of the first PC games I remember someone getting me was my uncle from a bargain bin got me a copy of a game called Vanger's One for the Road.
Never heard of it.
Which is I wouldn't have expected you to. It's a very strange Russian game. Those are all the words I'm confident in saying about it. It's like a top-down car action delivery. Those games like Wing Commander Privateer or whatever, where you kind of, they're fairly free roaming, but then you have bases where you can get missions, and then you might fight ships around. It's kind of a bit like that, but with like cars, and everyone's a weird mutant insect thing, and it's got like the most impenetrable like setting and story. Like everything's just like, you go to the first place and it's just a big caterpillar man who looks like he's made out of Play-Doh, and he just kind of says words at you. You know, he talks about podish and incubators and phlegma and nimbus, and you got to take this before the end of the plumping, and you know, like it's a really bizarre game, but I really like. I've never understood what the deal is with it. Like, and everything I know about it, I know because like other people have explained it or like written guides to it. That's the only way I eventually managed to finish it. I came back to it as an adult and managed to get further than like the second area, and finish it by the like an ancient guide. Um, and like, but something I like about it is kind of got. I guess I kind of compare it as a TTRPG, like to a. If I had to compare it to a TTRPG, it's like Troika, I guess, where it's just like very surrealist, very strange, very disconnected. It's expecting you to not know what the hell anyone's talking about or why anything's happening, and it does that thing that a lot of kind of Russian games that we know about like to do, where they just punish you. Like you get to the second world after probably doing loads of effort to get like a decent car and save up money and work for weapons and stuff. You go in the first base in the second area, and the guy there is like, I don't know you don't have the ID slip, and he takes away your car and your money and your weapons and gives you the crappiest vehicle in the game. And like how you're supposed to do it is you like work your way into actually buying a proper ID chip. The way to do it otherwise is you can go to one of the bases in that area at a particular time of day and dig into the wall and find one. And that's the only other way to avoid that phase. Anyway, I would love to do an official Dangerous One for the Road TTRPG. It would be an amazing challenge. I just need to like find out who I would need to talk to in Russia to do that and how much they'd want to me to give them. It's like you could just do a spiritual successor thing and like that would be fine. But and I'm not usually like this. I don't usually get fixated on particular kind of like properties that you need to buy the rights for. But in this case, I want it to be Avengers because I haven't mentioned this at all so far, but all of the art for Il Fantasma I'm doing myself. And so you know I've over the last few years learned how to 3D sculpt and like playing around with shaders and stuff. And man, there's just so much fun you could have with the Avengers aesthetic and its weird kind of Play-Doh mutants. I just want to do that. But you know, so I've been thinking about that game a lot, and I've been thinking about like how like being crushingly unfair and completely not understandable is like kind of a virtue in some ways, or it can be interesting. Which is great, right? It's like, yeah, totally having all of the ideas that are going to be like super successful.
Now,
I've got some other ideas that would actually be successful.
but we're not going to focus on those, are we, Laurence? So is this your first foray into visual art, or have you always messed around with visual art and now you're applying it to
No, I mean, pretty much. I mean, it's pretty much is for the most part. Yeah, like my first foray into visual art. Like I used to do a lot of photography when I was a teenager, and I got quite into that. I considered being a photographer as a career thing. So I've got like a sense for framing a shot and composing a shot and stuff. But yeah, no, otherwise I've never really been into visual art, and I learned to 3D model just because I wanted to be able to make little bits and bobs because I've got a 3D printer. I want to be able to make little bits and bobs. And then I started playing around with sculpting, and I found that it's really fun, and I like to think that I have something of an aptitude for it.
That's really cool.
So yeah, it just led to this. I was like, because this project, the Giallo project, has been on the back burner for a long time because I can't afford to get art done for it. And then I kind of reached a point where I was like, why don't I do the art for it? I can do 3D sculpts and then devise like really interesting kind of shaders, texture shaders to make them look weird. And you know, I think the results are all right.
Well, and it's yours, which is pretty damn cool.
It's a nice amount of creative control to have over something. You know, there's always an anxiety. I've worked with external artists on things before, and there's always a bit of anxiety over whether they'll quite get what you mean or quite be on the same wavelength. And it's nice to just be able to be like, oh, there's only one wavelength here. It's mine.
And whether it's good or not, it's still yours, right?
Yeah, the only limitation to my competence, which.
Oh, that's funny. So on a Sunday afternoon, there's a lot of things you could be doing, like trying to beat the next Russian game that tries to punish the hell out of you. But you decided to spend it with me, and I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm all right with it.
Good. And for those of you listening,
It's been fun.
I hope so. For those of you listening, this is the end. You listened to the whole damn episode, and I appreciate you doing that. Take care of yourself. Save some spoons for yourself, and if you've got a few extra, give them out to some friends. Take care. Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over. And you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.